you wait 30 seconds for Chief Simmers. As was mentioned, our next presenter is Rick Simmers. As Chief of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Oil and Gas Resources Management, Rick Simmers is responsible for enforcing Ohio's laws related to oil and gas drilling, production, plugging, orphan wells, solution mining, enhanced recovery, gas storage, and underground injection control operations. That's a mouthful. I give you Chief Simmers.
Good afternoon. Boy, this is loud. It's been a number of years since ODNR's Division of Oil and Gas was represented at one of these meetings, and it is a pleasure to be back. I'm going to go through some of these topics very quickly, so we might have a few minutes for questions if you might have any for any of the speakers. Sean went through the state legislative updates very effectively, so I'm going to skip over those. Jody and Melissa talked about EPA, both Ohio and state EPA initiatives, and also rules that have been initiated by the Division of Oil and Gas within ODNR. I'd like to make just a couple of comments on those. The first one is the incident notification rule that became effective last December. Prior to that rule, the Division of Oil and Gas, which is the sole and exclusive regulatory authority for most things oil and gas in this state, did not have a requirement that any of your industry call the division in the event of a spill, leak, fire, or other type of emergency. So you had to call other agencies. You might have had to call EMAs, EPA, even DNR's Division of Wildlife in certain circumstances, but you didn't have to call the agency or the division within an agency that regulated you. So that changed that. Many of you may remember a pad fire in Monroe County that happened a few years ago. After that fire, we evaluated local response, state response, and others to that fire. And I created an emergency response section that was working with this incident notification so that we could create a team of division experts that could be first responders to a location if there is a problem on one of your locations, so that you are the most knowledgeable people of your location, but we may be the second most knowledgeable people that can show up to that location. So the idea was if we create a response team that can get to that location very quickly, they can help you, they can help local responders, they can help other state agencies that may be responding to some type of event so that the response is appropriate for whatever's going on that location. I want to give you one quick example of how that has been effective. Last fall in southeast Ohio, there was a gas leak on a pad. I won't go into the name of the company or anything. It doesn't really matter. The gas leak got reported. It went through a series of notifications, and one of our emergency responders got to the location very, very quickly. The emergency responders have trucks that are pretty well equipped. They have weather stations on the trucks, and they have computers. And they were able to take weather readings. For example, wind direction, barometric pressure, temperature, humidity, that kind of thing. And they plug those numbers into a computer model, and then they plug the type of gas that might be emitted. In this case, it was methane, natural gas. So they plug this into a model, and there are a few other parameters they plug in. When they got there, the local fire chief, and by the way, the local fire chief has authority over everybody on one of these locations. They have authority over you. They have authority over any of the other responders, like a county EMA or DNR or EPA. They have authority on that location. Now remember, many of the fire chiefs might be volunteer fire chiefs. In this particular case, the fire chief was a volunteer fire chief. He smelled gas when he came to the location. He knew there was a fairly significant gas leak occurring, and he decided that he was likely going to order the evacuation of 200 homes in, I think it was about a half-mile radius around this pad. 200 homes. And this was in the middle of the night. Our emergency responder got there. He ran the model, put in all the meteorologic data, put in some of the chemical data, and that plume analysis comes up, and it tells the responders that as the gas is carried with the winds under the meteorologic conditions that exist, the gas concentrations are going to be X at certain distances from the point source. So after the fire chief had that information, he asked for one family to voluntarily leave until the gas was under control. So what could have been a very large evacuation became a very responsive one-family evacuation. So we created some of this to help not only your industry, but to help all responders and all people that might be impacted in some way from this. We do have an oil and gas locator that's on our website. So Jody talked about some of the reporting requirements that you have with this new rule. That oil and gas locator is an interactive GIS layer where you can go in, you can identify a well, and then you can see if there might be some special reporting requirement, like a 5-year time of travel or a wellhead protection area for public water supply. So you can see if your well is within that area, and then you'll know what kind of reporting you may have. So it's interactive, it's live, you can use it today. And by the way, that was a recommendation of the Oil and Gas Association. They said that searches for that were difficult, so they asked us to develop that, and we did. So it was a very good recommendation. Waste facilities. Jody mentioned that that is a very complex rule. It is. It's the sole and exclusive authority has caused the division to have to go into a mode where we do many things that not too many years ago we didn't regulate. Now, sole and exclusive has been around since 2004, but it has evolved a little bit over time. And new things are being applied to sole and exclusive. T-norm, technically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive materials. That's been around for a long time, but it's now being applied under sole and exclusive, and other state agencies, particularly the Department of Health, that have an authority for all other industries, have said they recognize that sole and exclusive takes them out of this, so they defer that kind of regulation to us. So we have to build an expertise in that kind of area. Now, with the waste facility rules, many, many things may come into play. This is talking about people that may treat, process, recycle, or dispose oil field waste. And the statute that was given to us by the legislature broadly defined oil field waste. It included brines, and then the words all other waste associated with production. And then production has a very broad definition. So it's a very broad definition, and it says that anybody that wants to do those things, they want to treat, process, dispose, have to come to DNR's Division of Oil and Gas, and they have to get an authorization. The initial authorization is through a chief's order, an administrative order, and the statute, as Jody pointed out, requires us to promulgate rules, to develop rules that go into some detail of how the statute has to be implemented. This rule is now almost 40 pages long, and as Jody pointed out, there are about 5 areas that we need to get better language. The language that's in those 40 pages may be pretty poor, pretty inconsistent. So we've got a draft. We gave the draft to the industry about mid-December last year, and then at the end of January, we held a stakeholder meeting. We gave you about 6 weeks to read the rule and then come to the first of a series of meetings so that we could discuss it. In that first meeting, it was decided that we need to break into some smaller groups to address issues such as de minimis. What does de minimis for fluid content in cuttings mean? It also affects how you interpret T-norm. T-norm is very important because it affects your waste management. It's a very, very, very costly portion of your waste management. So the industry is working with us to form small groups to suggest language that we would put into the rule to address those types of issues. Spacing's another rule that we've been working on. Now, spacing's a little bit unique. The statute defines that wells have to be placed in certain ways, and then we have rules that go into the specifics of well placement and drilling unit size. It also includes setbacks from unit lines or other wells. This statute, though, is unique in that it says that the division cannot initiate a change to spacing or setback rules without going to the Technical Advisory Commission and getting approval to do so. That's the only statute that has that requirement. The rest of the statutes may require us to promulgate a rule, but the division can initiate a change to the rules without permission from others. So we had to go to the TAC, get permission to go forward with these rule changes. We've had several meetings with them, official public meetings, and they voted unanimously in the last meeting to go forward with changes to these rules. I'm going to just go over this very, very quickly. We are required by statute to have compact and contiguous language in our rules. So we've kind of rolled that compact language for a drilling unit into the spacing and setback rules as well. So the horizontal industry, the shale industry, has been very active working with us to try to get to a point where we can agree that we have an effective rule. I would encourage the conventional industry to work with us as well. These rules are going to impact you. You need to look at these draft rules, and I strongly encourage you to have input on what the final rule may be. It will have a direct impact on you. One of the things that's required of all state agencies and all divisions within state agencies is under the authority of Ohio Revised Code 119.04. That's a general statute within Ohio law. It requires all state agencies to look at their rules, not the statutes that were given to us by the legislature, but the rules. The rules are generally the detail that define how a statute operates. So the legislature has a statute in the books that says every state agency, every division that has a rule has to look at those rules once every 5 years and evaluate if they need changed or modified. Modification could be you throw them out altogether, or you create a new rule, or you make simple corrections to an existing rule, or you modify some significant portion of that. So we, like every other agency and division within state government, have begun a process where we are going through that statutorily mandated review of our existing rules. I want you to know what rules are probably going to come to you as a group, and we're going to ask for your involvement and input, because we do think there is some modification that's necessary in these rules. The first is the UIC rules in general, but specifically the Class 2 disposal rules. We've worked on a review of those, and we think they need a significant amount of clarification. So probably by late spring, we're going to come to you, the affected parties, and say, we're going to propose some changes to these rules, and we have to go through a very regimented legislative process to initiate any rule change. But we recognize that you represent a lot of expertise to help us make a proper rule, an effective rule. So we'll be bringing rules or drafts of changes to rules and asking you to help look at them and help make them effective, meaningful rules. The UIC Class 2 disposal rules will probably be the first one that comes to you, and that'll probably come late spring or very early summer. Plugging rules will follow that. Enhanced recovery projects. There aren't a lot of those in Ohio, but there are some. So it'll probably be a narrower group of you that will have an interest in that, but we're going to address some changes in those as well. Class 3 wells, which are solution mining permits. That's pretty much limited to the northeast corner of Ohio. We don't have too many facilities that fall under that authority, but we are going to address some changes to those rules as well. So if you represent companies that are affected by any of these rules, I encourage you to stay involved, and even if you aren't, if you have a generalist interest in talking about these, we'd be happy to have you included in some of these discussions. Last thing I want to talk about, and this is the thing that I think is going to affect your industry more than anything we do in the coming year or two. We're going to have a lot of impact on you. There might be some statutory changes coming over the course of the next year or two. There will be rule changes coming. But this thing, I think, is going to impact you over the next year or two, and then have a greater impact on you than all the other changes maybe combined. Many of you actively use our database. Our database is called a Risk-Based Data Management System, RBDMS. Many of you get CDs from us that have the database loaded, and then you go to our website weekly and you download updates so that your version of a database stays current with our database. So every week you have to go to our database or our website, download and upgrade, run it in there. And one of the problems with that is when you run an update to your database, you're doing it online, and if there's a glitch in the system, if there's a little electric blink in your connection, if a thunderstorm goes by, if there's some interruption to that data transfer, then you have a corrupted file and you don't have the same database that we do, so your database becomes out of sync with our database. Our inspectors have to go through that same process, and it creates some problem for us as regulators. That database was originally built in the mid-90s. I was acting chief at that time, and Don Anderson was director at that time, and he came to me and said that in 1 year, the department's mainframe computer was going to be turned off because it just wasn't cost effective to run it anymore. So they were going to turn it off, and he told me you have 1 year to find a solution to replace all your computer applications that were running this mainframe. So very quickly we had to create a database, which is where RBDMS came from. We developed that, and then since the mid-90s, we've added quite a bit to it. It's grown, it's gone through a lot of changes. That database currently runs in SQL. SQL runs the back-end portion of the database. It does all the data processing. The interface that you use is a Microsoft Access interface. So if you run a query or look up information, you're running through Microsoft. And one of the problems that we've run into is that as we develop that interface, that Microsoft Access interface, all of you know that Microsoft upgrades their software from time to time. Well, some of our queries that are built into the database are not in the most recent version of Access. So Microsoft has told us, because you're using some of the older versions that they're not going to support anymore, that in the coming year, if we want any technical support from Microsoft to support the older versions of Access that run a large part of the database, they're going to charge us $1 million to work with us for 1 year to keep that software upgraded for us. And then if we want to extend that to a second year, they want to charge us $3 million for the second year to help us maintain functionality in these older versions of Access. Obviously, we're not going to do that. So for about a year, we were working with the Department of Administrative Services to come up with a contract or a proposal to rebuild the database. Perhaps go back and rebuild the SQL, the processing portion of it, and definitely rebuild the interface portion of it. Last fall, we put out what's called an RFP. It's a request for proposals. It's a bid. We're asking computer developers to bid on the redevelopment. Now, the contract that we put out was 1,400 pages long. So we were working on this thing for about 2 years, 1,400 pages that the contractors had to go through and then make a proposal on. Those proposals were due last week, and we had a number of companies that bid on it, and we're now in the process of evaluating those proposals. We anticipate that in April, we'll probably select a contractor. Before we enter into a contract with them, we'll sit down with them to make sure they fully understand what those 1,400 pages of contract mean. And then we'll enter into a contract, and then over a 2-year period, we'll begin development. And that database is going to impact you almost immediately. As portions of the database are being built, and they go through their beta testing, as the beta testing is complete, we're going to slide it out for your use. The first portion of the database that's going to be rebuilt is permitting and surety. So if you apply for a permit of any type, whether it's to drill, plug, modify in some way, a UIC permit of some type, any permit that you may get from us is going to be modified and go through the new database as one of the first things we develop. Another thing that'll be first among the developments that the contractor will work on is surety, your insurance and bond. So a couple of things are going to happen there. We've created this 1,400-page document. We're going to go over it with the contractor, but we're going to ask you in the coming months to meet with us. Maybe it'll be in a setting like this. Maybe the association can help us bring anybody that's interested in to see what we're proposing for development. And then we want your feedback. We still have time to change what will be developed before the contractor finally comes in. So each of you that are registered with us are going to get a letter and a flash drive. We've been holding off on this for a few weeks, but you're going to get a letter and a flash drive, and it's going to have company information on it. We're going to ask you to voluntarily help us update information. We want to update the information as the programmers begin to develop the new applications, the new program models that will be used, so that when we transfer the data into the new program, we'll have the most accurate data we possibly can. I'll give you some examples of why that's important to you. Taxation. Some of you may have gotten letters about ad valorem tax. The Department of Taxation would like us to help them with production so that the counties can figure out how to send you out invoices for ad valorem tax. So your production reporting is going to become more critical than it has been in the past. Surety. It's very important that you have insurance and bonds, so we're building a system that tracks your insurance and bond. I'm going to go into a couple of examples how you will be able to utilize this. Completion reports. Completion reports are things that you're going to go online, you're going to submit. Now, if you don't submit certain kind of reports, like a completion report or a production report, according to the law, according to the statute, you are in material and substantial violation of the law, and potentially we could give you an order to tell you to turn your wells off because you're in material and substantial violation. We don't want to do that. But let me give you a more practical application of where this applies. If you own wells, there are very specific steps in law that define how you must report to us, when you must notify us, and many of you may not understand all the provisions in law that require reporting or notification. So we're going to build those kind of references into the programming. Many of you are going to get this list, and this list is going to have your company information on it. So we're going to ask you to verify that your company information is correct. You're going to have an opportunity to correct it if it isn't. We're going to give you a list of wells. If you're a well owner, you're going to get a list of all the wells that we say you own. Now, you may not agree with that list, so there's going to be an errata sheet where you can say that your list is incorrect, this is why it's incorrect. Now, one of the things that may show up is you own a well, and you may say, I don't own that well, I plugged that well. And you may have plugged the well, but you're also responsible to notify us when you complete a final restoration. Statute says within so many days of plugging a well, you have to restore the property. It goes into detail what that means. But you have to notify us that you've done that. If you haven't done that, then that well stays on your surety. It stays on your bond, and it stays in your liability. You may have plugged it 2-3 years ago or even more, but because the final restoration was never noticed and never inspected and approved, your liability didn't come off of that particular well. Now, many of you probably know if you plug a well, and you properly plug the well, and then you restore the property, that particular well comes off your bond, and it's no longer your liability. So if that well should begin leaking in the future, it's not your liability. We're not going to come to you and say you have to go replug that well. But if you haven't gone through all the steps of the process, then you're still liable for those kind of things. So when we send you this list, it's important that we get correct data, not just so we can put correct data into the new database, but it's also important so that you know what is in that database, and it's in your self-interest to make sure that data is correct. Another thing that that database is going to do is help you file CERC reports. Many of you may have gotten a letter a year or so ago from EPA or CERC saying that you have to go back to paper filing. The paper filing was a decision by US EPA. They said that the filing that had been acceptable for quite a few years was no longer acceptable, and they said that we, the Division of Oil and Gas, weren't collecting all the pertinent information that's required for a CERC report. So part of the reporting is going to include bits of information that we may not normally collect from you. As we worked with US EPA to try to get an agreement on what a complete CERC report meant, they're requiring us to account for every field that's on the current federal CERC report. So we're going to have to work with you to gain information. Now, how will you use this database to be able to file your CERC reports in the future. As all the data comes in its various forms, it might come in completion reports, production reports, or other reports that you submit to us. Or it might be part of your owner file that you will have an ability to update. You'll have the ability under the new system to go in and say, under your own identification, create a CERC report for my holdings. Now remember, you've went through all your list of wells, all your tanks, and other information that are required in a CERC report. So you're going to have one button, and you're going to tell the computer to compile your CERC report. So it's going to go to all the different tables and fields within the database for all the different kind of data that you've submitted to us. And it's going to pull all the pertinent information out from all these different places and pull it into a CERC report. And then that's going to be given to you by the computer, and then it's going to ask you, is this correct? EPA requires you to certify that it's correct. So you'll be able to electronically certify that it's correct or make modifications until it is correct, and then hit submit, and it'll go to all the entities that should have gotten it. So that's one way. Let me give you an example of how a permit might work or how an administrative review for a company. Now this doesn't matter if you're a one-person company or you have a company that has a lot of people. You're going to set up an owner registry. So you're going to define yourself as an owner of some type. And then we're going to ask you to define an administrative person that comes in and manages your company profile and grants permission on your company behalf. So if you're applying for a permit, let's say you're a company with multiple people. The administrator for this database will come in from the company, enter their credentials that'll identify them, and then they're going to identify another person that they want a permission granted to. So they'll give a PIN number, the computer will give a PIN number to that person. When that person logs on, it will recognize them. It'll recognize that the company's authorized them to do certain things on behalf of the company. And if the company is limited what they can do, it'll only pop up options that the company administrator has decided that person should do. So for example, if the person's only able to apply for a permit, only a permit option will come up, and the computer's going to ask that person, what kind of permit do you want to apply for? And then it's going to work through electronically. Production report. Maybe that person's authorized to do both permitting and production reporting. So as that person logs in, puts their identifier in, it'll say, do you want to do permitting or do you want to file production? And then it'll help them through whichever they choose. So the other things that we're going to do is allow you as administrators, as owners of companies, or officers or others within a company, to set up what the computer people call a dashboard. Dashboard's simply a number of preset items that you can put into your computer that you want automatic notice on. So if you want to know when your company's applied for a permit, as soon as that application's received, it'll send a report back to you saying application received. And then you'll be able to open that application receipt and track it through every stage with a timeline to when it's anticipated to be issued. It's going to show you who's working on it, what's being worked on. If anything was deficient, it'll show you that it was deficient, who it was sent back to. If you want to know the status of your insurance, you could click on that button and it'll tell you, 60 days till your insurance needs to be renewed, or 30 days, or 15 days. So you get to set those parameters so that it can remind you of things, or it can help you search for things or review things as they're occurring. So a lot of data is going to be asked of you. And this mailing that we're going to send out isn't a statutory requirement. You don't have to do this. And it will require some input from you. And if you own a lot of wells, it's going to require a fair amount of review, because you may get a fairly long well list. But I think it's worth your time to look at that well list to make sure you agree with us that first you own that well, and that the status of the well is what we say it is. Because if it isn't, you could have some liability associated with that. So we're about out of time, but are we over time? Okay. I could go into a lot more detail, but I think what I'm going to do is ask the association in the coming weeks if they'll send out notice to any of you that might be interested in getting a lot more detail on what this computer system is expected to be, and then get your input on what it should be and how it should function for you we'd like your input. So I'll just end that discussion with that, and if you'd like, we can answer questions. All of us can.
Questions?
Hey, this was easy. Thank you.